Another edition of Beat the Closing Number presented by thelines.com, recording here on Tuesday, May 9th, breaking down a couple big series, Phillies and Blue Jays, along with the Angels and the Astros. But before we get started, remember to give the video a thumbs up and ring the bell to get notifications whenever The Lines releases a new sports betting video on any market, including Mo's day-to-day MLB bets. And be sure to follow Mo on Twitter at Nuwwarah. And you could also head over to play.thelines.com to have a chance to win a $25 Amazon gift card daily in our MLB Pick'em contest. Again, for more details, head over to play.thelines.com. Mo had a nice 2-0 podcast day yesterday with the Brewers and Cardinals cashing in. Wilson Contreras getting back on track against his former team. Mo, if you want to share how you felt, I know you've had a nice couple of, or a few days betting on baseball.
Yeah, it's been a good run recently, but started off up 10 units, went down 10 units, now back up close to 10 units. So just the next dip could always be around the corner, so can't get too excited.
So let's get into these games today, starting off with Phillies and Blue Jays. The Phillies at home, 16-19, as high as minus 145 on the money line against the Jays, coming off of a series sweep of the Pirates over the weekend after just getting swept by the Red Sox earlier in the week. And the Phillies were able to avoid a sweep at the hands of Boston, taking that finale on Sunday, I believe winning 4-1 or a final score of that nature. But this matchup, Alek Manoah taking on Aaron Nola, and Manoah has a 4.71 ERA, and that xERA is a little bit above 2 points higher than his ERA. The command has been an issue for Manoah as well, a 5.2, just about 5.2 walks per 9 innings pitched. And for Noah, it's a little bit of a different script despite his early season struggles. 4.64 ERA, and the xERA is just under a point lower. So a little bit of positive regression in a sense coming for Nola. We've seen that somewhat over his last two starts, especially in the outing against the Astros. Then again, the Astros lineup has been scuffling overall. And Nola also starting to get that velocity back, especially in his last start against the Dodgers, although he did allow 4 earned runs in just under 7 innings. So Blue Jays, Phillies, Mo, what do you got?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of good things to say about what Alek Manoah has been doing so far. He's lost some bite on his breaking pitches from what I could tell. Like each of them lost about an inch of maybe break and drop, if I'm remembering. I was kind of looking through the StatCast stuff. That being said, you think Nola is going to do better, but it depends on the metric you look at. Sierra is not impressed with his work so far. 4.47 on that one. It's kind of the opposite problem for him. He's lost almost 3% off his swinging strikes, so he's just like not able to miss bats. He's not off to the best start either. Let me just say today's bets aren't going to be for the faint of heart, but yeah, Philly. One nice thing for Manoah in this spot, they are third in chase rate. Surprisingly, it doesn't profile as an offense I thought that is going to be super chase heavy, but they've been much more swing happy this year. I don't know if it's like a organizational philosophy maybe they were pushing in the spring, but yeah, they have the second worst walk rate. So the walks have obviously been a huge issue for Manoah. He's walking like 5 guys per 9. That's pretty much an amount that you usually can't get away with, but I don't think that's going to be a big issue against this Philly lineup. So basically it just comes down to, I think both pitchers should be better than they've been, but even if I'm giving Nola a little bit of an edge, which I do, I think the Jays' edges on offense and defense obviously are enough to where they shouldn't be quite this big of underdogs. So we're just getting plus 120 on a better defense and a better offense here. And in a matchup where I could see either pitcher scuffling, I mean, I really wouldn't be surprised if either one of these teams wins this game by 5, to be honest. So maybe looking at some alternates is probably good here, depending on how these pitchers end up performing. But yeah, I do like the Jays a little bit, around plus 120. I think it's a bit too high.
And their struggles between Manoah and Nola are certainly reflected in the Cy Young market in terms of the betting odds, especially when you look at Manoah for a guy that was touted. And it's warranted when you look at his metrics and numbers over the last 2-3 seasons. But Manoah all the way down to as high, or actually is reverse there, all the way as high as 70-1 over at DraftKings Sportsbook to win the American League Cy Young Award. And you could check out all the latest MLB futures odds if you want to price shop over at thelines.com. We touched on a somewhat undervalued AL Cy Young betting candidate yesterday. And if you want to listen to that podcast with our guest, Dan Zimborski from Fangraphs, just listen to the Beat the Closing Number podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. But most second of 2 games to discuss here. And actually on that note, before we move on, Dylan Cease, another American League Cy Young candidate that blew up yesterday against the Royals. It's crazy when you think about White Sox pitching, and maybe that's just from my fandom because I grew up a White Sox fan, but Giolito regressed last season, and now it's seemingly happening with Cease. So the White Sox struggles continue to mount, which if you are a White Sox fan, it probably is no shock to you considering how the rebuild has gone. But I digress, Mo. Over to the American League. Angels and Astros, and LA took the first game of this series last night. Angels are 20-16, minus 140 on the money line for tonight's matchup. Astros getting below 500 with a loss to the Angels, 17-18. And we mentioned how jam-packed the AL West is. It's the same thing with the American League East. And probably the American League Central at this point should be relegated with 4 teams, make that 5, contending in the AL East with the Yankees currently in the cellar. And you have seemingly four contenders in the AL West. So the AL Central leading Twins and so on and so forth in that division probably should be ticked down a notch when it comes to postseason contenders like we've seen over the last 2-3 seasons. But getting back to this matchup, Mo, Shohei Ohtani against Framber Valdez, another hypothetical Cy Young matchup with Ohtani the favorite to win AL MVP and also certainly in the AL Cy Young betting market near the top of it against Valdez, who's around 20-1 to win the award. And Ohtani, no surprise as well, leads all of baseball in wins above replacement. War across not just pitching metrics, but also his ability to crush the baseball, which we've seen going back to last season and the last 3 to 4 seasons, really. And has also a 2.54 FIP, a 2.93 xERA. Valdez, a 2.60 ERA, but a 4.21 xERA. So that xERA is just about 1.5 points higher than his traditional peripherals. And LA also with the 4th highest WRC plus against Southpaws this season. But you, on the other hand, think the Astros have value at plus money here. Like I mentioned, the Angels just about at minus 140 on the money line. So what makes you side with Houston in the second matchup of this series?
Yeah, fading Shohei Ohtani, definitely not for the faint of heart. But I have Framber projected right there with him. I don't think there's honestly much of a talent difference between Framber and Shohei Ohtani. So the Angels, they've gotten a lot of mileage out of smacking lefties this year, which makes sense when you look at their lineup. Guys like Drury and Renfroe, these have been lefty killers for years. So it makes sense that they're stronger against lefties. But that being said, Framber, he is not a guy who has ever struggled with the platoon disadvantage. He doesn't have really any platoon splits in his career. So I think that I'm more worried about lefties that have shown some struggles against right-handers when I'm looking at lefties facing the Angels. That's definitely not Framber. He also, on the other side, Shohei Ohtani, he's kind of taking a different approach this year. He's going so slider heavy, and most of them are in the zone, which is kind of a weird thing to say. He's getting a lot of mileage out of swings and misses in the zone this year. He's not getting very many chases. When I look at the Astros, their bats of all skills are very good. 88% zone contact rate. They're third in MLB. So I think if they can get a hold of the ball and put it in play here against a pretty bad Angels defense, they could probably have a better game than a lot of people think in this spot. Still, in my opinion, quite a bit of a more talented lineup, even with the injury to Jose Altuve, Brantley. I still think they have a more talented lineup than the Angels. Much better bullpen, much better defense. So given all that, I think plus 120 is too high here. I did like this one a little more than the Blue Jays. But yeah, these ones have not really moved. I got a late start today, kind of because yesterday was kind of a travel day for me. So we'll see where these move. I'll be curious to see if the market is moving on either of these. I've been doing well against the closing lines all season, really. But these ones, I can't imagine people are going to be too excited to bet on these sides.
Yeah, especially going against Ohtani, but the logic certainly makes sense. And we discussed this a little bit yesterday, speaking of beating the closing number. If you listened, it's very early to say that about futures a month into the season. Things can dramatically shift. I think I mentioned this on one of our earlier podcasts in the season that the Guardians were right around 10-1 to win the AL Central in early June last season, and they go on to win the division. So you can obviously get the best of the number theoretically with a team that's struggling, and buying low is one of our discussion points from the podcast yesterday on a team that we're trying to buy low on pretty much all season. And maybe last night marked the turnaround if you want to go check out the podcast yesterday with Dan Zaborski on one team's division odds, like I mentioned earlier. But speaking of the market adjusting, Mo, I'm curious for your take on this division, because I know you had a position going back to your preseason wagers, or I guess spring training. Astros number got adjusted to win the AL West after we recorded yesterday at pretty much every sports book. I noted that they were as high as plus 110 in the market over at DraftKings to win the division, which that price has not been adjusted, or maybe it was around even money. So been adjusted about 10 cents. But now pretty much the consensus price everywhere else is minus 110. Rangers are down to plus 300 from the plus 400 number that I think I had on yesterday. And the Angels right around plus 400. So that number hasn't seen much of a dip. Mariners at plus 600, plus 500. So in that ballpark. And that number hasn't really seen much of an adjustment. But Rangers and Astros have certainly seen their numbers shift. So Zimborski mentioned he liked one team in the division. You, on the other hand, bet the Angels to win the AL West. And I'm curious if you still think that number is valuable, as high as plus 500 over at BetMGM to win the AL West, as they're right behind Texas in the division standings.
I do. I do think it's still a little bit too long. I think the Angels are right there. The Rangers, I don't know if I believe in their lineup. Their offensive numbers are so good so far, but I just have a hard time buying it based on the names in the lineup. But that being said, banking these wins without Corey Seager is nice. I still see a lot of downside, obviously, with the potential for injury in their rotation. For the Angels, I actually think after some early season disasters, the bullpen has been a little better. Estevez has been actually pretty good, and Matt Moore has been good as well. So I think they at least have like a couple guys they can trust. So if they can add another one or two, this still just like goes back to that that deal that sent Raisel Iglesias to the Braves. That was so bizarre that the Angels just absolutely punted on him for basically nothing. I think they would be in so much better shape if they had him, but I still think they're live, and plus 500 still seems a little bit too long to me. I think there just has to be value when the Astros are still minus over the field, at a lot of sports books. I don't know if that's right. The projections certainly don't. They have the Astros more like 35-40%.
It's interesting too, because pretty much every guest we've had on has disagreed with you. And that's not to say that you're incorrect. It's just, obviously, when you have two different sports betting minds, it's fun to get that interaction on the difference of opinion. And Houston has been the pick, even though they've struggled. And the rotation obviously is taking a little bit of a dip without Verlander. Then again, Hunter Brown is also.
We should also add Jose Urquidy hurt and Luis Garcia, now Tommy John. I mean, this is getting pretty brutal there.
Yeah, I mean, Urquidy, not to say that you're not losing arms in the rotation for Houston, reliable arms in terms of guys that pitch every 5 days, but Urquidy and Garcia were still inconsistent year over year. But I do understand your point in terms of now having replacement arms. Hunter Brown has been the guy in the rotation so far for the Astros, and his AL Cy Young award odds right around 40-1. But the lineup too, I mean, you don't have Altuve in it, so that needs to be noted. Houston's offense is a bit banged up overall besides Altuve, but we'll see. I think your Angels pick, I mean, you definitely got closing value on that. I mentioned not necessarily being able to count your CLV earlier this season. I don't think you're going to be losing closing line value on your 12-1 bet on the Angels to win the AL West, regardless of how they end up finishing in the standings. You have to think they're going to be at it all the way through. But if I end up hurting your CLV and jinxing it, I certainly apologize. But that is Mo Nuwwarah. You could follow him on Twitter at Mo Nuwwarah, 2 W's in the last name. I won't bother spelling out the rest. And you can follow the lines on Twitter at The Lines US. We'll be back tomorrow with more of Mo's baseball day-to-day bets. I think Thursday has more day games, and Wednesday still has at least a couple night games. So should be back on for a Wednesday edition of Beat the Closing Number. But for now, that's Mo. I'm Eli Hershkovich. You can follow me on Twitter at Eli Hershkovich. Thanks for watching and listening. So long, everybody.